Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to section 2 of the characteristics of the Arabic letters, صفات al-huruf. In this video, we'll take the characteristics without opposites. In the previous video, we've taken the characteristics that have opposites, which are 5 groups. The first one is the whisper versus the apparent, al-hams versus al-jahr. The second is the strength versus the softness, al-shidda versus al-rukhawa, and in between them there is al-tawassut. The third group is the elevation versus the lowering, al-isti'la versus al-istifal. The fourth group is the adhesion versus the openness, al-itbaq versus al-infitah. The last group is the fluency versus the restraint, al-idlaq versus al-ismat. In this video, we'll take the characteristics without opposites, which are 8 characteristics. First one is the whistle, al-safir. Second, the ease, al-lin. Third, the deviation, al-inhiraf. Fourth, the repetition, التكرير. Fifth, the spreading out, التفشي. Sixth, the lengthening, الاستطالة. Seventh, the قلقلة, the shaking sound. And 8, nasalization, الغنة. The first characteristic with us is the characteristic of the صفير, the whistle. If we pronounce a letter like sin, if we say S, this one has a whistle and it has a sharpness of sound. So the letters of these characteristics are 3, the sad, sin, and zin, and zai. It is defined linguistically as sharpness of the sound, and technically it is sharpness in the sound of the letter produced from it passing through a tight passage. And this is the most important thing, that it passes through a tight passage, so it produces this sharp sound. However, there are some difficulties facing some people in pronouncing these kind of letters. The first one is to bite so hard on teeth, and to overcome this problem is to protrude the lower jaw so that the upper and lower jaw align. S, S, as. The second difficulty is pressing tip of the tongue so hard on the plates of the teeth. That's why the sound will not come out. So the sound comes out naturally with no force. Here are some tips. The first one is to keep a small space between the tongue and the plates. And the second one is that the arrangement according to the strength of the whistle is first for the sin, S, and then to the sad, S, and lastly to the zai, Az. S, S, Az. The second characteristic is the characteristic of al-lin. If we say words like Quraysh, al-bayt, qawm, khawf, so here it is defined linguistically as the easiness. And it is emitting the letter from its articulation point with ease without any effort from the tongue. The letters are the waw and ya with sukun preceded by a fatha, like the words that we have said now. Quraysh, al-bayt, qawm, khawf. The third characteristic is the deviation, al-inhiraf. Of 2 letters, letter lam and letter ra, al-ar. It is defined linguistically as drifting, and technically it is drifting of the sound of the letter as it leaves its articulation point due to incomplete running caused by the tongue turning from its path. The mechanism of the letter lam is that the tip of the tongue sticks at its articulation point as in shidda, so we just put the lam at the gum, and then the sound deviates of the side of the tongue as in rakhawa, which is used also for the articulation point. Al. While in the letter ra, it sticks at the left and the right of the very tip to the second part of the articulation point. That means that the gum of the 2 front teeth as in shidda. Then a small space at the very tip of the tongue is made so the sound can escape out of the mouth as in rakhawa, and trilling is therefore avoided. So the tip of the tongue is somehow cupped for this small space at the very tip of the tongue to occur in the middle of the tip. This is the reason both of these letters have the characteristics of tawassud instead of rakhawa and shidda. This picture will illustrate the difference between the deviation of the lam and the deviation of the ra. In the first picture, the deviation of the lam, the sound deviates off from the sides of the tongue, so it comes from the middle to the sides of the tongue. While in the ra, the sound deviates from the very tip of the tongue, from this small space at the very tip of the tongue. R, L, R, L. The fourth characteristic is the repetition of the letter ra, which is at-takrir or at-tikrar, both are correct. It is defined linguistically as repeating something once or more, and technically, it is the light trilling of the tongue when pronouncing ra due to its tight articulation point. And note here that the reciter should be careful not to exaggerate the repetition leading to the occurrence of more than one ra. Not to say ar, but to say ar, ar. So this small space at the very tip of the tongue prevents the trilling and it let the sounds out of the mouth. The fifth characteristic is the diffusion of the letter shin or at-tafashi, and it is defined linguistically as the spreading out or spreading around. And technically, it is spreading the sound of the letter shin starting from its articulation point until it collides with the inner plates of the upper and lower teeth. Ash, ash. The sixth one is the elongation or al-istitala of the letter dad, and it is defined linguistically as lengthening, and technically it is the pushing of the tongue forward after it collides at its articulation point, and this is due to the influence of the compression of sound on the tongue until the tip of the tongue lightly touches the gum line of the two front incisors. As we say here, here in the illustrating picture, the sides of the tongue, the tongue press on the sides of the tongue and touches the area after the two front incisors. However, here, if you push the tongue forward with force, it will turn to a letter dal. We don't do this. We just touches the area at the top front incisors lightly. So if the sound went forward with the tongue, the sound of dad would then end up like dal. The seventh characteristic is the qalqala. It is defined linguistically as shaking or disturbance, and technically it is disturbance of the letter when it is in the state of being non-voweled until a strong accent is heard when it is articulated by parting the two components of the articulating parts, not by collision, without accompanying it any opening of the mouth or circling of the lips or lowering of the jaw, as in letter ba, ab, ab. So the ba sakina is recited with a qalqala. It emits by separation of the articulation points. Aqo, aqto, ab, aj, ad. So they are 5 letters collected in qutba jad. So notes here on the qalqala letters that when these 5 letters have vowels, we don't find this annoyance because vowel letters are just pronounced by parting the two components of the articulation parts. We do taba'ud. And the 5 letters are letters of shiddah. The qaf, ta, ba, jim, and dal are letters of shiddah. And also, if we attempt to say one of these 5 letters with sukoon, we should find that the articulation points closes completely. Aqqa. We should make, there will be a noise in the articulation point because of the imprisonment of the sound behind the articulation point. Aq, ab, أج. So we should make تباعد. And also it is if any second letter is emitted by collision or تصادم of the two parts of the articulating point, but these 5 letters emit by the separation of the articulating point, like vowel letters, but without any corresponding movement of the mouth and jaw that is associated with the vowel letters. The second note is the qalqala letter is similar to a second letter in that there is no accompanying jaw and mouth movement with it. On the other hand, it is like the second letter in that the qalqala letter is articulated by separation. And also if the qalqala letter has a shadda, indicating that merging of the two of the same letter, the first of shadda, which is sakin, is articulated by collision, like the word al-haqq. The first qaf here, on stopping of it, it is pronounced by collision, and the second qaf, which is had a dhamma, is recited with a qalqala. So it is pronounced with separation without any accompanying mouth and jaw movement. Does when we say habl, for example, and al-balad, does the qalqala letter here have the same strength? We will see. So the scholars have divided the qalqala into two classes. The first one is the lesser and the second one is the greater. The lesser comes when the qalqala letter comes in the middle of the word or at the end of the word and we are not stopping on that word. In this case, we say the qalqala letter and immediately proceed to the next letter or a word. For example, ينقلب إليك تجري حبل. While the greater qalqala is when it comes in the last of a word and we are stopping at this word, like وتب خلق البلد. However, some other scholars have divided it into 3 classes: the lesser, the greater, and the greatest. The lesser is when the qalqala letter is in the middle of the word, like habl. The greater when it comes at the last of the word, like al-balad, and the greatest when the qalqala letter is mushaddad, like watab. The last characteristic is the characteristic of the ghunna, or the nasal sound, only of 2 letters, noon and mim. So it is defined linguistically and technically just as a nasal sound that is emitted from the nose, and this is a required characteristics for the letter noon and mim, and the ghunna cannot be separated from these 2 letters and is an inherent part of their makeup. And this is our lesson for today. Thank you for listening and watching, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.